Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host. And today I'm going to talk to you about the second chapter of Dr. Jaishankar's book, Why Bharat Matters. It's a very important book. It reveals not only how he thinks about foreign policy, how he thinks about India's role in world politics, and how he sees the world, but it also reflects India's foreign policy thinking and India's uh, process of making policy because he's writing this book while he is in office as the External Affairs Minister of India. So while he's been busy, extremely busy, the last 4 years and nearly 5 years in conducting foreign policy, it's amazing that he found time to also write a book. So today I'm going to talk about the second chapter of the book. For those of you who are joining this series for the first time, please, I would recommend that you go and read the introductory chapter, the first chapter, the commentary that I did on the first chapter. It's part of this same playlist. And I will also post a link to the first chapter at the end of this video. So that way you can potentially take a look at it. But before I highlight some of the key points that he makes in chapter 2, please subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Khanversations, like the video, press the bell icon, and also make sure that you share this with your friends and your colleagues who might be interested in this discussion about this book. So the second chapter is called Foreign Policy and You. And in this chapter, he is trying to do something which is very interesting. He's trying to basically convince ordinary citizens and individuals, citizens of the country, that foreign policy matters to them. Usually in most democratic countries, what really motivates voters, etc., is domestic politics, bread and butter issues, kitchen table issues, as we talk about them in the US. But they rarely are concerned with foreign policy issues. In India, the citizens are more engaged with regards to foreign policy than, say, in the United States, even though the US is the world's superpower and is often engaged in wars. I have lived in the United States for more than 30 years, and I can't remember when we were not at war at some point. But anyway, so if you look at this point that he makes, a good foreign policy must work for you personally. And so during the rest of the chapter, he gives many examples of how individuals have benefited by India's new foreign policy, rescuing students from Ukraine, rescuing citizens working in Sudan, and elsewhere. This is an important point that he tries to make in this chapter, that each individual, well, not each individual, but individuals also should experience a difference in foreign policy and say foreign policy matters to them, whether you're students abroad, whether you're trying to do business, whether you're trying to look for work abroad, etc. A sensible foreign policy will help you. And so he cites numerous examples. If you're interested in the nitty-gritties of it, read the chapter. But what he does in the second paragraph of this chapter is interesting. He says, after saying that a good foreign policy must work for you personally, he goes on to say, your everyday needs from the world must be better met. Since we are a collective as a country, our national security must be ensured. As that is done, the pursuit of our aspirations must be facilitated. Foreign policy, being the link to the outside, should enable us to draw what we seek. It could be technology, capital, best practices, or work opportunities. And obviously, we would all like to be strong, look good, and feel appreciated. So what he does in this one paragraph, I wish he had done someone had done a graphic for him for this book, he's essentially developing a model of hierarchy of goods that foreign policy can provide. So you have individual needs, and then national security, and then foreign policy as something that can get you jobs, etc., outside, or bring capital and technology. So builds relationships and affiliations with the outside world. So the first step is individual benefits, national security benefits. The third one is benefits to the country in terms of technology and capital, and then also respect and acknowledgement, and basically looking good. So if you notice, it kind of reminds you of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is often used in management, that all human beings first need physiological needs, roti, kapra, or makan, breathing, food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep. I think you should add Wi-Fi to that. And then safety and security, then love and belonging, self-esteem, and then self-actualization. So he kind of develops this model, and I like it. It's kind of interesting. Even though there are levels of analysis problem for graduate students who do quantitative research or do qualitative research, in the social sciences, they will recognize that there is a level of analysis issue here, because when you're talking about individuals, then you're moving into the arena of liberal individualism. And then when you're talking about at the national level, you could be in structural or classical realist mode. But anyway, it's an interesting concept, and I just wanted to flag it for those of you who want to have a discussion with regards to that. I will be happy to share with you. And then he does something very interesting. He moves to the next level after talking about individual and the benefits to the individual. He starts talking about national security. And then he basically says India faces more than its share of external challenges, partly because India's boundaries have not been settled. And that is so true. India has boundary disputes with China as well as with Pakistan. Happily, all boundary issues with Bangladesh have been resolved and settled by 2015, several years ago. So in that sense, there are still boundary disputes. I think there are some with other smaller countries. But essentially, he says that because India's boundaries are not settled, we still have a lot of national security challenges. And that is the second level in his hierarchy model, that the US, that the national security becomes an important element of foreign policy. And then he says something very interesting. He says, when it comes to politics, the battle of narratives is a perennial exercise. India has to patiently make the case that its pursuit of national interest is very much in tune with its advocacy of global good. A large part of answers lies in the world of argumentation and in the effectiveness of communication. Diplomacy thus has a responsibility as both the shield and the sword of polity. So he seems to have a very realist view of the role of narratives, even though he tries to give it a liberal touch. So he says the purpose of foreign policy is to pursue global good. But he says that when we pursue our national interests, we are also pursuing a political good. I'm not very sure. I'm sure that you can explain India's initial position towards the Israeli response to the horrific attacks by Hamas as in India's national interests. But I'm not very sure how that would translate as a global good, especially for the Palestinians and people in Gaza. Anyway, but I mean, this is something that everybody says, even the United States says that American foreign policy is a public good. Everything we do is to maintain global order and benefits to a large people. So when we pursue our national interest, it is in your interest too. So anyway, but to me, what is interesting is that there is a realist side to it, which means he sees diplomacy as a battle of narratives. And it sometimes may not really help. So if you take the case of Canada, it was a battle of narratives, essentially, the Canada-Khalistan issue. And then when the US joined the fray, then we didn't see the same battle of narratives coming out of India. So it is a function of power. So if India comes across weak powers, then it will use narratives to counter narratives. But when it encounters a more powerful player, then it looks inwards and then conducts an inquiry into its own people. We are all waiting for the result of that inquiry. I don't know when that is going to come out and what happens subsequently. But this is an important point where he sees diplomacy as essentially a battle of narratives. I mean, this battle of narratives has dominated India's public sphere and television. Palki Sharma was talking about the power of narratives and the importance of narratives. But these 2 points, the one that are in blue, I want you to look at them very carefully. He says recent global debates about India have implications for our security. And he does not elaborate very clearly as to what these debates about India are. And he's left it for us to guess. He's just hinting at it. And I wish that we would write these things very clearly, because things like this can lead to misunderstandings. And then he says that surprisingly, improvements in governance, applications of technology, and progress on long festering issues can be depicted as detrimental to freedom. So he's basically saying the foreign policy decisions that we are taking, or the policy decisions that we are taking to improve governance, such as maybe abrogating 370, is misunderstood as detrimental to freedom. So many things that the government is doing in the global debates, in the international media, are being portrayed as anti-democratic. Well, India's ranking in press freedoms has gone over 140. There has been a lot of talk about the decline of democracy in India, no debates in the parliament. There's a lot of suppression of free media and so on. So these are the debates that are going on outside. And he's saying that we need to engage with these debates, because these debates can have national security implications. He's basically saying that people are discussing about the rise of Hindu nationalism and are discussing the decline of democracy in India, rise of populism, etc. You can see the debates. American human rights organizations have recommended that India be listed as a country of particular concern, because especially after what happened in Manipur, and so on and so forth. So these are the debates that are going on, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not. These are the debates in international media. And if the purpose of the foreign policy is to impress the rest of the world, then you have to engage with those debates. So that's the point. It's an important point, and I think it's more directed towards India's policymakers and India's elite, on whom he is banking on for engaging in this counter narrative. He asks this question after discussing the issue of international debates. He says, perhaps we must ask why more of us need to ask ourselves why separatism in India finds regular support in quarters abroad. It's an interesting question. He's saying that why we should ask ourselves why separatism in India is discussed abroad, because I would also add to that perhaps we should ask ourselves the question why there is separatism. If everybody, sabka saath, sabka vikas, if the country is taking care of everybody, then why is there separatism? And that is also a thing that I would recommend. So yes, ask yourself, why are the Canadians helping the Khalistanis? But also ask yourself, why is there those who sympathize with Khalistanis, even though there are very few in India, but a lot in the diaspora. Then he makes this point that South Asia is undergoing a real transformation by encouraging win-win outcomes and buy-ins by partners. He talks about India's neighborhood-first outlook, addresses this challenge. I'm not very sure that India's neighborhood-first foreign policy is really working. India has issues with China and Japan, Pakistan. So we really are not on friendly relations with the nuclear powers and the big nations that are on our borders. India does not have good relations with the only country in the world which is a Hindu country, which is Nepal. India's relations with Nepal are slightly getting better, but they have become really bad till last year. India's relations with Myanmar are also not very good. India's relations with Bangladesh are fine. India's relations with Bhutan have also deteriorated. Bhutan is turning more and more towards China. And of course, the latest issue with Maldives. So you can see that increasingly, while India talks about neighborhood first, you find Chinese encroachments in Sri Lanka, which forced India to extend a $4 billion package to essentially make sure that Sri Lanka does not become fully part of the Chinese, shall we say, imperialistic extension in South Asia, but countries more and more like Maldives, like Bhutan, like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, are more in the ambit of China. So if you look at China's South Asia policy, looks at least more effective than India's neighborhood first policy. And I think there has to be a discussion. I see this discussion here in Washington. There are people here in Washington who are talking about that, but I don't see that much of a debate in India, even in the context of this little tiny country, Maldives, of 500,000 people, just 500,000 people. There's so much of hate being spewed towards it. It like reminded me about that episode with Israel, where an Israeli judge declared one of the movies as a propaganda movie, and the whole country went mad and crazy and anti-Israel, anti-Jew, etc. And so you see the same fever here against Maldives, and what it might just do is drive Maldives firmly into the lap of China. So the public engagement on these security and regional issues is also not, I think, very productive. It just shows that, yeah, there are many Indians and they are able to make comments on Twitter, but that does not mean that India's foreign policy is successful. The current president of Maldives, for the first time, went to other countries first. He's coming to India soon, but he went to China and then he went to Turkey. So the question is that there needs to be a debate in India about the neighborhood first policy. Is it working? The time when there are many more power centers, our place in a multipolar world order is clearly more assured. Of course, if there are more power centers, your chances are likely. It's like saying that we're going to give one medal. Of course, then your chances are less. But we're going to give 10 medals. Of course, your chances of winning a medal increases significantly. So he's saying at a time when there are many more power centers, we are one of them. Well, yes, that also includes Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Japan and Germany and France and Britain, so many more powers, and then India becomes one of them. This is, again, my critique of his perception that the world is a multipolar world. I'm not fully in accordance with that idea that we are in a multipolar world. So I hope you found this discussion interesting and thought-provoking. And so please subscribe to Khanversations, like the video, press the bell icon, and wait for the next edition of this chapter. I will be reading the third chapter today or tomorrow, and will post a summary of it. And I look forward to your comments, even your hate. So thank you very much. Until next time, this is Muqtedar Khan.